between all of us here and you guys out in the audience, and also the ones here on the chat or the stream. So what we want to do is just, I'm going to lead it. I'm going to open it up with a question for each of them. We'll go down the row and give them a chance to kind of let you know who they are, a little bit of their background, and then I'll start off with a few questions for each of them. And then from there, it's an open discussion. In essence, like if you have a question about something, please raise your hand. We'll try and get to that as we go. And if somebody says something that, hey, can I add something to that, then please, by all means, do so. You know, like it's an open conversation about everything. But everybody on this panel, or at least these two ladies on the panel, were involved with confronting Mike Brown, Amber and Kat. Christina and Sarah on the other side. Christina was an FI missionary, and she obviously is going to be studying at the University of Kentucky about some of these things, CSA, etc. So I thought she would be a really good voice for us to hear from. And then Sarah down on the end, a lot of you guys know her from BRSM and some fire days, but she had her own experience going through, as a student, going through deliverance ministry, which was a big part of, if you were at BRSM, and even Summit Fire, you knew that was a big part of the ministry there. So I'll let each of you give yourself a little bit of an introduction, maybe just a 30 or 60 seconds, real quick, of who you are, a little bit about your background, and then we'll go from there. So Amber, if you can start us off real quick. There's the...
Hello, my name is Amber. Collins is my maiden name, so you probably know me as Keith and Darla's daughter back there.
Can we turn her up?
Hello, is that better? Okay. Amber Collins Rhodes now is my married name, and I'm Keith and Darla's daughter. So I grew up as a faculty kid, and then later was a student at BRSM, and then actually ended up working for Fire later on. Kind of full circle, but yeah, so it's really cool to be here today and see all of your faces. I feel like I kind of want to say in my opening, I hate being on the microphone, but I'm doing it anyway. There's so much good. I am so grateful for so many of the relationships that have been forged through, Fire, Brownsville. I mean, sitting up here even next to that and these women, so many of you in this room I admire and love so much. And we can hold two truths at one time, that there was a lot of good, but there was also a lot of really hard, messy things, and it's okay to talk about them. So I'm really grateful to be here, and thank you, Chris, for giving me this opportunity.
For those in the room who know me, probably as Catherine Barry. There's a lot of faces I don't recognize, but I'm Catherine Barry LP now. My husband is Nate. He sang earlier. But our family started visiting Brownsville Revival probably in 1996. So we've had we've been on the long haul of the journey. Oh, sorry. Yep. I am Catherine Barry.
We need a louder mic.
Yes, so sorry, guys. So we started visiting the Brownsville Revival in 96. Our family knew Mike and Nancy forever. I ended up moving in 2000. I think Rob, who started in 2000, fall of 2000? Bina, yes, Addie. Okay, so fun. Okay, quick question, because I keep thinking about this. Who remembers that bread table at New Hope? At the day-old bread. Yeah, sorry. I don't know. That keeps coming to mind.
I was just telling my son about that the other day, and he was like, "What are you talking?" He's 13. He's like, "What are you talking about? You guys ate day-old bread?"
We ate day-old bread, and we felt lucky.
Yeah, hey, thank God. Yeah.
So we were in Pensacola. I transitioned with the school to North Carolina. I think I was a grad at that time. And it's so funny because when people ask me why I moved from Florida to North Carolina, anyone else struggle with an answer? Like people that don't know anybody from these circles. So ended up going to Thailand for a couple years as a missionary. Met my husband Nate. We're married. I live in the Metro Detroit area in Michigan, have 3 wonderful children. Never planned, thought, and full disclosure, desire to be connected with this again. It's amazing how God has kind of brought people together, and it's not, even though it's been such hard topics, there's been so many beautiful things the Lord has done. I have not talked and seen these people in 20 years, and so this is amazing. But yes, the circumstances are very mixed, but this is amazing.
So I'm Christina Patterson Wood, and I have a long history. That I was saved in the revival in '97 at 15, went to BRSM in January 2003 when fire was still in North Carolina, and followed the school to Louisiana before I made my way here in 2008. And I think I came on with FI in 2009 or 2010, somewhere in that range. And then it's really fresh for me because we resigned in the 1st of May, so just a few months ago. So up until the 1st of May, me and my husband, of course, my husband sort of married into this. We're part of FI. And currently studying, just as a quick background, I've been working on my social work degrees. I just finished my BSW in May. I start my MSW program in a couple of weeks with a focus in trauma responsive practice. I am, disclosure, by no means a professional, like I'm not a clinician yet. That is the trajectory, but I spent the last year of my undergrad degree as a result of following some of the IHOP stuff, studying CSA and trauma, betrayal trauma, institutional trauma, those kinds of things. And so I think that's part of the reason that Chris asked me to be part of this panel.
Hello, I'm Sarah Schmitz-Cohen, Schmitz back then. I started at BRSM the fall of 1999 and was graduated at Fire in the first graduating class, spring of 2001. Chris asked me to give, I'm going to give as quickly as I can, just a quick overview of kind of what I experienced there for those of you who don't know. I'll make it brief. I'm not going to name names. If you want to look in depth, take the time. It's a bit of a long read, but my story is in the Michael Brown witness report. On the table of contents, just click on Sarah Schmitz-Cohen if you want to hear more about it. But I had come to BRSM fresh off the mission field. I'd been part of a music ministry and had already experienced overseas music missions and was just looking for more in-depth ministry training. And very early on, within the first couple weeks of my first semester, just talking with a new friend, we were getting to know each other. I shared about some mild depression I had struggled with off and on through high school. And just casually talking, it wasn't anything, and it wasn't ever anything that put me out. I was a very successful student, athlete, musician at that point as a young person and grown up in a Christian family. I hadn't been abused. I didn't have come out of addictions. And yet I was, little did I know that friend was new to the student deliverance team and reported me without asking me to pastoral care, where I was summoned by them and told I had to come. And they quickly assessed me. The lady in charge there probed with a lot of deep questions on the first day. I didn't know why. I didn't understand why I was there. And she told me I needed deliverance. And even though I'd grown up in Christian circles, I had no idea what she was talking about. I had no experience with it. And in the very following week was taken through those first deliverance sessions. It began as a very rigorous schedule. They put me on of 9 hours a week, three days each week, 3 hours each. And it was very quickly, I was manipulated and sucked in by the couple who was leading it. Again, I'm not going to name names in this setting. But the person in charge at that time had no business doing it. I sure know that now. Had come out of a very violent past, radically saved, had no qualifications to be lead demon chaser, so to speak. And very quickly dissected every part of my identity. Everything that I would have told you back then were weaknesses of mine, frailties. They suddenly had a demonic label. And that was a little easier to own in some ways because I would have seen them as things I struggled with. But very quickly, even the things I would have said were good about myself. I'm a musician, I'm very sensitive, very deep love for music, that kind of thing. I'd grown up with it. Those things were labeled as demonic, that everything was a stronghold. And so I went through this 9 hours of deliverance for, I'm not really sure how many weeks that went on, but the deliverance was continual over the course of two semesters. And this couple that was in charge of it very quickly selected me as kind of their favorite. They treated me like a daughter. They told me, I'm your spiritual father, I'm your spiritual mother. And I had a lot of questions. I'm very analytical by nature. And they told me, you're asking too many questions. You just need to trust us. You just need to submit. This is how you'll get free. And fast forward after months and months of being put through these sessions that were very, very physical, very, would be preemptively held down by a man, and preemptively, but at the same time coached to express anything I was thinking, feeling, even voluntarily, because they said that was the way that the demons, the strongholds, would express themselves and how I would supposedly get free. And it warped my view of God. I remember getting to a point where I didn't say it out loud, but it was just a very awful session. And I remember in my heart this gripping moment where I said in my spirit, I said, God, I didn't know you were like this. And something snapped inside of me. My perception of the Father was warped and continued to be so for years. And pardon me if I get emotional. I come at this a bit from a different angle of being real raw. It's real raw again. It's come up again. It's something that I didn't expect to ever revisit, and here we are. And it ended with a very awful situation where I was suddenly pulled in by this male leader and another leader on staff for an impromptu deliverance attempt with me in pastoral care building one day. And there were no women there to witness it. It was in a room with no windows. The door was closed. It was me and these two men who were leaders physically restraining me. And it was very violent, and I wanted out. And there was a moment of something in me snapped, and I had had enough. I was about a year into this almost at that point. And I started saying quietly, let me go, let me go. And they would not respond. It was just labeled, in their minds as a demon speaking. And it turned into me with everything in me yelling, let me go. And they did not. It was a knockdown, drag out, awful moment that went on for quite a while until they gave up. They wore out, and we stopped. And I went back to confront them after calming myself down, just to talk to them about it. I really felt like, especially with this couple, they told me they loved me like a daughter. And I felt like I loved them. And so I went back to them saying, I would never do this to you, but if you allow this kind of scenario again, you're looking at legal liability. And within a couple hours, I went off thinking we were done talking, that I'd done my due diligence, warned them as a friend, and had no intention of going after them. I really didn't. And a couple hours later was pulled back into a conference room full of pastoral care leadership and threatened to be kicked out of school and told, if you're saying that was just you yelling, how inappropriate, how out of control, how unfit you are to be a school of ministry student. And I've never really known the term gaslighting.
This was at BRSM,
This was
correct?
at BRSM.
Okay.
This was at BRSM. It all got turned on me. And I left. They decided a couple days later to allow me to stay in school as long as they severed ties with me and had nothing to do with me. So I continued throughout the next year. I went to fire for obvious reasons. For me, it was to get away from them. At that point, they rejected me. They had nothing. They wouldn't even talk to me when I see them. And I graduated because I'm not a quitter. I wanted what I'd earned as a student, but I left a backslidden mess. And thankfully, I had some wonderful friends who I lived with who one in particular, really helped me over the next few years come back to trust Jesus again. but I never got resolved. And so all that to say, sorry, that wasn't too quick of a version of the story.
No, that's
But for 25 years, I did my best to forgive and move on, but I haven't wanted to talk about it. And this has brought it all up, really, because of the similarities, even with the story of how Dr. Brown drew Sarah in. When I read that, I thought, wait a minute, that's what happened to me under different leaders at the same time who were under him. They used the same tactics, and
That's what I was going to say, to try and tie everything together, because some people may be wondering, how does this relate back to the whole situation with Mike Brown? Just like what you said there, that the folks that were overseeing you, or whatever, lack of a better word of saying it, they were telling you that they're your spiritual father, spiritual mother. And we understand that, like in some contexts, like I understand what they're saying, that they're there for you to help. I'm not talking about you, but just in general, that language is thrown around. But it just can be used to manipulate someone into doing what they told you. Just trust us, just believe us, etc. And I think Bob or somebody mentioned that earlier on. So I appreciate the story and the context. We'll come back to that here in a second to talk about that a little bit more. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to share too, whether you guys are aware or not, Sarah is actually tuning in today. And one thing that I keep thinking, because I think sometimes we forget the human details when there's these big stories. Sarah's a mother, Sarah's a wife, Sarah has a family, and she has had the guts enough. How embarrassing that she has had to hear people she doesn't even know on all sides talk about a spiritual leader touching her the way he did, this and that. Like, Sarah, I just want to applaud you. You have been so gracious. You have been so bold. And even like as we're here today talking, I just want you to know, like, we see you as the human that you are, and we just honor you. And again, if that were me, I think every time I know it would be talked about, like there would just be this like uncomfortable feeling. I know you've gone through that. And so just like everyone in the room, like, just to bring awareness to that, like we're totally.
Yeah, that's wild. I want to go back with the timeline in mind to your text to Mike. I think it was a text or message to Facebook message to Mike Brown and what you said in there. If you can briefly recap that, I do want to be aware of time. It's kind of tough because we came back late for lunch. We'll have a second panel as well. So we'll have to cut this one a little bit short, but the point is that, like, can you recap that for us real quick, and what you felt during that time? What made you actually reach out to him and say those things?
I had just had a baby, so I had a lot of time just hanging out in my bed. I was just on Facebook scrolling. And it was kind of during the whole, and some of you have maybe heard this because I've shared it before, during the whole Me Too movement. And it's just something I will say about Christian leaders. They like to jump on bandwagons and their direction will change. And that was like the word of the hour. And all of a sudden, Mike is advocating for females. And he, had this whole thing. And obviously, I had been disturbed for years. Sarah was a friend. I was never okay that she just disappeared. We knew that things were not appropriate. But again, I'm living in Michigan. I kind of left fire circles and kind of was like, I'm just not associating with that part of my life anymore. Like, by God's grace, I love the Lord. But yeah, I just kind of disassociated. Mike Brown, I was at a church, no one knows Mike exists. Most people in my world have no clue about the Brownsville revival. It's not like I'm in these circles and obsessing over Mike like I think he thinks we do. But I saw that post and something in me was like, I need to write this man. Like, I can't see that hypocrisy and say nothing. So the Roy's report has it. Some of you may have seen my messages. I don't remember it exactly, but I remember I'm like, I'm not even going to tell Nate I'm sending this because he'll talk me out of it. And I copied and pasted his quotes, just advocating for us females. And I just said, I pasted and I said, I have such a hard time reading this because the only thing I think of that comes to mind is the name Sarah Monk. And I just brought up all the things that I had known at the time, that they had held hands, that they were alone, that I had seen her once. He says, I'm not credible, but other people in the room too, sitting on his lap. Sorry, I keep looking at the screen, so I'm like thinking I'm talking to Sarah. And just kind of addressed all these things and the hypocrisy and just how literally she vanished. Like she literally vanished. She had plane tickets with my mother to go to his daughter's wedding in Maryland. She was at my house to borrow a dress for the wedding a couple days before. This is before cell phones. My mom shows up at the airport. I think even the fire office took up a collection to pay for her ticket to go. And so my mom's at the airport. They're supposed to fly together. Sarah never shows up. My mom gets to Maryland. There was no cell phone to call. She just gets there and she asks Mike and Nancy, like, oh yeah, she has a boyfriend in Texas she went back to. We're like, what? And it's as if she vanished, and the way the culture was, at least externally, it's as if she never existed. And that always bothered me. Number one, she was my friend. Number two, she was everywhere. You didn't see Mike without Sarah. She babysat for the faculty and the staff's kids. She was a part of it. We would all hang around the offices. She was there. And so confronted all that. I did bring up stuff that I knew about Ryan Bruss, that I had just met someone. I knew something had happened in Texas, but it just happened. I just met someone that was at the Bible school that Ryan was leading in Texas and knew the story that it was an 18-year-old girl that had babysat for the Bruss family that he had gotten in a physical sexual relationship with. Ryan did not confess, he was caught. And the way it was handled, and Mike bringing him back, and this and that, and I said it's also odd that for years Nancy was invisible. You never saw Nancy, just all these things. It's a woman, I'm realizing. And he wrote me back right away. I didn't even read it because I know the man enough. I knew what it was going to be. How disgusting that you think that about me. It's all I'm just this deplorable, disgusting human that I could even think that this godly man would do anything wrong. And supposedly, not supposedly, all these answers about Nancy, which was a first for me. And so I didn't even write him back. I was like, I'll just go to bed and won't tell Nate my whole interaction with Dr. Brown and just go on with my life. And then shortly after, he writes me again. And I think it settled in and he was nervous because he knew that I hit on something. And in his response to me, he didn't deny anything that I said. The sitting on the lap, the hand-holding, the being alone. I did not know about him touching her body in ways and kissing on her, or else I definitely would have brought that up. Didn't know about him at the time, would have brought that up. But his next thing, was asking me to, secrecy and this and that. And I did write him back. I said, I just want to let you know, I am not writing you to try to smear your name. I know that's what you're worried about. This is between us. This is something I'm bothered by, and I want you to know I know and I'm not okay. And I was actually worried about that when the Roy's report reached out to me, because I'm like, is he going to sue me? Because I was like, I'm not going to share this. But I called a lawyer, and they told me, Donovan, I'm good, right? I would have gotten a letter by now. I got no letter, so I know I'm good.
We're good. Amber, you reached out. You grew up at Fire. You were younger during that time when you were in Pensacola. About how old were you?
I was, 13, I think, when fire started.
Okay, and then if we fast forward to the present.
Yes.
So what was going through your mind? Because you reached out to Sarah
Yes.
directly, and
Yes.
you had several conversations with her, etc.
Correct.
You weren't friends with her necessarily because of the age gap at that
Yeah.
time, but
No.
you'd seen enough.
In fact, she, like Catherine said, she was with us faculty kids a lot when the split initially happened. We were at New Hope a lot. They were getting everything ready. It was a really quick turnaround. Obviously, those of you who were there remember it was very fast. It was like everyone had Christmas and then you came back and the semester started. So there was a lot to do. And we were at the offices a lot. She was always with us. She would sometimes watch us. I noticed she was with him all the time. Again, I was really young, so I didn't really have context for that. Fast forward to, I'm now 38 years old with 5 children, and what prompted me to reach out to Sarah was Dr. Brown's involvement with IHOP. So there was a video that kind of was circulating where he had gone to IHOP and he stood on a stage. I'm sure many of you maybe saw it. If you haven't, I think it's online somewhere. And he basically was telling everyone to be quiet, to not talk about what was going on, and saying to let leaders handle it. Don't gossip.
don't talk about this, don't gossip. And when I saw that video, literally, like, she just came to the forefront of my mind. So I found her on Facebook, and I literally and I had no knowing, and I think this is important to say because I'm not like this. I think for a while I felt like I'm a pot stirrer and I'm trying to, like, mess things up. I remember having a coffee meeting with Dana and, just being afraid. And when I reached out to Sarah, I had no knowing of Chris ever reaching out to her. I never knew about that. I didn't know that you had written Dr. Brown. I had literally no knowledge of any of that. The only knowledge that I had, and I'm here to tell the full and whole truth, is my best friend at the time, her dad was Nels Prip, and I knew of a story of her dad and my dad confronting Dr. Brown together. But it was, again, just kind of like whisperings. So it wasn't like, I didn't know full details of everything. So I was just curious. So I reached out to her and I just said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I remember you. I was a kid. Granted, I think I was 14 at the time. She was, 19? Really not that big of an age gap, but at that age it is a bigger gap. And I just said, I remember you. I don't know if you remember me, but I have always had questions about you disappearing. I mean, literally, that's what happened. She vanished. It was like she vanished, and then it was like, don't ask questions. Like, just don't talk about it. And so she responded immediately and just said, oh my gosh, hi, so good to hear from you. I remember you. Ask me anything, no questions are off limits. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And it was one of those, like, I was in bed, like, going to sleep, and I was just like, oh my gosh, she's actually gonna talk to me. And then that was just kind of like when the floodgates opened. And then I learned things that I did not go looking to learn. But I do want to say too, and I know you've already addressed her, but we're here today, I feel like, because of her courage. And also even just Sarah Cohen sharing what she shared, like what this is. And I know it's hard and it's messy and it's not fun to revisit some of these things, but when someone comes forward with something that's so wrong that has happened to them, and it brings courage in others to also share what's happened to them, that's really, really powerful. And I just have so much admiration. I don't have a story. I wasn't abused in this ministry. I wasn't hurt by anyone in particular. I think I have things that I've had to, I think what Bob said, like deconstructing to reconstruct. Like, I think we've all been on our own journeys, but I don't hate God. I don't hate the church. I don't hate Dr. Brown. I just think that it's messy. And I remember, and I'm going to say something that actually Dana said to me when we went to coffee and we talked about this. She said, when Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, and they marched around the city, the Lord told them, and when the walls fell, it was victory. That was a victory, but it was a big mess. And it's a mess sometimes, and it's just part of that aftermath. It's kind of like Hurricane Helene was really interesting because that happened kind of simultaneously when all of this stuff was coming out, and it felt like almost just like a symbolic, like it is messy, but there's also like so much beauty in that, and genuine authenticity, and people just feeling like comfortable to come and like say their stories and tell their stories. I just think has been like so powerful. So much respect for that.
I'm not gonna keep telling this. No, and I just really want to honor Amber. And you guys have to understand, none of us were talking to each other. I love how on, especially the mercy culture thing, or things I've heard from Mike Brown's camp, like, oh, we were just all this vendetta. None of us were really thinking about him. If anything, we were thinking about Sarah, and obviously he's a part of that equation. But I know that Amber too, like Amber lives here. She has to walk and see these people, and she was branded like a keyboard warrior. People were coming against her. There was opposition. And I just really honor Amber for having the guts to speak out when people didn't want her to. And she won't tell you that, I want to say that. And I just really applaud you. And behind the scenes, these conversations, Ron knows, none of us, like, we certainly have our problems. None of us were trying to go after Mike for any other thing than we need truth. There's a lot of people hurting. Even people that didn't know about this are indirectly hurting because there was so much unhealthiness, and that was stuff coming from the core that needed to be addressed. And the amount of grads and fellow staff and students that have come out and saying, this has actually helped me. Healing widespread across the globe, people that have reached out. And so I honor so many people's courage. And Chris, you've been spearheading this for so long. And again, with no agenda other than you loved Sarah, she was our friend. And you care about what's right. And I'm just so appreciative. And Londa and Fonda, those women are fiery. You want them on your side. And Greg, yes, Greg, thank you for just being like a brother through this. And when people were telling us we were crazy and we're lying, it's like we knew the truth, we had each other's back, and now everyone knows the truth. When we all spoke out, we didn't think people were gonna believe us, truly. Yeah. I was ready for my inbox to be flooded with like all these people who I stopped talking to 20 years ago to tell me they hate me. Yeah. And we were shocked. They were like, thank you. And so God is good.
Yeah. But, as they're talking, you guys may have questions, thoughts, whatever. The whole point of this is the context around what actually happened. So in the morning sessions, we had some guidance, obviously, from former leaders, current leaders, et cetera, within church circles. This is now talking with the folks who were involved in some way, shape, or form at BRSM Fire with Mike Brown, confronting him or bringing things to light. So if you guys have questions, practical things about how things were handled, please do raise those questions. Ron, go ahead there in the back.
You covered it a little bit, but I want to just really hear from you. It was said in the Mercy Culture video that there was a plot. That was the word that was used. There was a plot. That there was, you can't have one person plotting. So there's nobody other than the three of you, Kat, that way, including you, Chris. So I'm just going to ask you, as the internet is watching and you're under oath, were the three of you plotting to take down Dr. Brown?
No.
Absolutely not.
No. I think it was just another indication, and I'm saying this in all humility, of his view of self-importance of himself. None of us hold him in the esteem that I think that he sees himself in and thinks is projected on people. And I'm not saying that to be dishonoring, like that's completely the truth, so.
Yeah, there was no plot. In fact, I hadn't talked to you in 20 years. Yeah, maybe just like Facebook comments here and there. And then same with Chris. It was really odd because after I reached out to Sarah, I kept running into you and Amy. Like at Sabor and Target, and it's like, I was just like, this must mean that they're gonna be in my life again and I need to have a conversation. And so I ended up texting Amy, and then we got on a phone call. And then I do wanna say this too, and I think this is very important. I went to my parents with information that I had learned from Sarah. And then obviously that was how I learned about the Ray and Kim situation, which, if I'm being completely honest, was very earth-shattering to me. I knew Ray and Kim very well. I actually ended up talking to their daughter on the phone for a very long time after that, and it was a lot of processing. And when I went to my parents, they were very open. It was one night late. I was at their house for hours, and I was just like hounding them with questions. And my dad looked at me and he said, I will go with you to confront him again, because he had told me about going and confronting him with Chris, and I was like, okay, well, I need to think about that. And I really appreciated that, and the fact that he had confronted. And so I think that's an important part to also say.
I think it needs to be said that this whole idea of like a vendetta and things like that, that there was an undercurrent of fear that I think many of us felt, and Mike Brown was very intimidating, and no one's looking to confront somebody who debates and all of that. These are like, we experienced trauma responses to that, right? Like that's what was taking place. So there's no one here that's like excited about it, because he was not the person that you would want to go confront. I mean, I didn't have loads and loads of interactions with him, but he was always intimidating. I think all of us in some way probably felt that in some sort of way. It's just this undercurrent. So it's really, and I mean, and again, like even just stature, right? So he's just tall. And so when you're a woman especially, and you're in a very male-dominated environment, that's even harder. And so there's like, it's silly to think that these two women would just have some plot against
Some collusion or whatever, or the
Yeah.
three of us colluding in some fashion. No, we didn't do that at all. I reached out to Sarah, we'll talk about that in the next session, but I reached out to Sarah on my own separately because I was fed up with what I had witnessed and that not matching up with what I understood to be true in life as I got older and married, etc. So, but yeah, so to answer that question, no, absolutely not. We did not get together, form this plot. That's a lie. Christine, I want to ask you, so you resigned from FI in May, I think it was you said. What kind of brought you, obviously it was part of maybe this going on, but like what else was going on? You were a missionary. There's missionaries who texted me who are watching. They can't be here in person, but they're with us, or they'll watch later on. What brought you to that point to resign from FI? And don't get me wrong, I am not telling missionaries to resign, so that's not the reason for the question, but what was going on in your own heart and mind to bring you to that point?
I think for me, this was obviously a tipping point. I think there was some things in the back of my mind where I was already thinking about it. I mean, like understand my whole life has been connected to this community and this movement since I was 15 years old. That's the majority of my life. And so that's not something that you easily just pull away from. I feel like in some ways, like my right arm is cut off. Like I've lost half of the community because I just started to see patterns, right? It was just patterns. It's when you're away from it and you're kind of looking at it, right? We all have a piece, right? As part of, I take a trauma resilient community training, and part of that training is that everybody has a piece, right? And so we may see our one piece, but when we're together collectively, we can see the whole picture. And I started to see the whole picture, that there were just patterns. Things like people would just disappear. They would, like people were at fire or people were FI missionaries and then they're just gone. And there's no explanation. And not that you have to explain why every person leaves, but it just struck me as odd because some of these people were like, they were noticeable. It's not just like the person who sat in the back row every week. It was like, no, these were people that were on a platform a lot and now they're just gone. And so this thing with Sarah just disappears, right? There's no explanation. They're just gone. So I start noticing that. I start noticing that people are afraid. I felt like the missionaries as a grant, I can't speak, I haven't talked to everybody, but it felt to me like this whole community just got some really devastating news and nobody's saying anything. How do you can't have 5 people in a room without 6 opinions. Right, so how is it that you've got 75 missionaries who have nothing to say about this? And I'm like, I feel like we're scared. And I felt it. And then that starts to go down a whole like, okay, I shouldn't be afraid like this. And I should feel safe with the leadership that are heading up these organizations that I'm a part of. And it just was a rabbit trail from there, right? Obviously, I felt very strongly that FI did not handle it appropriately. Their communications were poor. They were so awful. And then it was this like, don't tell anyone, but don't tell anyone, but don't tell anyone. And I'm like, don't talk about it, but we should be talking about it. We need to be talking about it. That's the reason that we're all so broken and shattered. But it's a way to silence, right? If you can isolate everybody and get everybody to be quiet and not talk about it, then everyone doesn't put the pieces together. And we hold up this institution, right? It's the institution that we're protecting overall. And that's kind of the way that I started to, right? It's hard. It's a lot of detangling maybe of a lot of it, deconstruction maybe, I don't know. But I think that was the view. It was like, we're all responding with trauma responses and in an unhealthy way, and leadership is continuing to tell us to do things that are really unhealthy and unhelpful, and now this isn't safe. This isn't safe anymore. And for me personally, I think the biggest thing that just was a tipping point for me was, I'm a survivor, not of CSA, but of SA in my past, and I cannot justify staying with an organization where the people at the top are not safe. That God forbid, if something were to happen to me and I went to them and it was their friend, I think there were some situations where they would have stood up for a victim or survivor, but I think if it had to do with their friend, no, it was not safe. And I can't justify that. And the work that I do, working, with at-risk children and people who are experiencing a lot of these types of abuses, I can't justify being part of an organization that's okay with supporting an abuser. Like I can't. And so that was the tipping point. And there were some other things that, I think had been building along the way. And I think we all sort of learned, again, it's probably maybe a trauma response. We gaslit ourselves a lot of times. We internalized a lot of things. We were not listening to our bodies. We weren't listening to, I think Bob, you talked about on the podcast, you're not listening to your own faculties and what you know. This is logic. This is just this. And yet you walk away gaslighting yourself, feeling like, well, this is really just a me thing. This is a me thing, right? This was a me thing. So I internalized so much of an unhealthy culture as me being unhealthy. And, and then also just through some of the education that I've gotten and to see that it wasn't me, right? I just wasn't listening to myself, and there was some really unhealthy things.
Yeah, we're also, Liz asked the question in the last session with Bob. I forgot the exact question, but I wanted to say something that we also were taught that we should always believe the best about everybody, right? And so I remember Mike Brown getting up and talking about that topic in different ways, but that we should always believe the best. And I get what he's saying, that you shouldn't walk around suspicious of everybody. That's not healthy either, right? That doesn't make sense. But when you have that kind of teaching, which is in general correct, it can then lead to a situation where, yeah, I'm just going to believe the best about whatever anybody tells me and not really dig into, hey, but that doesn't feel, like you're saying, it doesn't feel right. Something's a bit off here, but I guess I'll just believe the best. Maybe go with that intuition. I know ladies have more intuition than sometimes us cavemen guys, right? But you go with that intuition and say, let's investigate this a little further. You wanted to comment?
No, I think that's an important thing. We learn so much. Well, you want to believe the best, but it turns into blind trust.
Right.
Right? Just turns into a blind trust where the expectation is you're going to believe what I say. And so once many of us kind of pulled back from this and we start critically thinking, right? We begin that critical thinking process. You're like, but no. And that's what starts to crumble all of the things that need to crumble, because you've got people now who are, the three of you who are looking at this and going back, and you're looking back, and I mean, obviously we have the gift of hindsight, right? But you're critically thinking through these things. And it's a journey, right? We were very young. Our brains weren't, most of us, when we were there, our brains weren't even fully formed. We were still that's a thing, right? You're
very impressionable.
Yeah, you're impressionable, and there's, I don't think, right, there's a very big difference between intention and impact, right? So I don't want to say that anyone on leadership was intentionally doing harmful things necessarily, right? Because I don't think that, but that doesn't negate the impact that it had. So just a lot of unhealthy things happened because we were very zealous, right? It almost felt like some exploitation, right? I don't think that was the intention. But I think looking back, we can probably go, yeah, we were kind of exploiting these young people and the zeal and all this emotion in this heightened environment. And to some degree, all of us were caught up in it, I think. And again, I want to just make that separation. I don't believe that the intention of leadership, of everybody in leadership, was to do that. But I think there was that impact as a result.
Absolutely. Amber, I think you want to say something.
No, I'm glad she said that, but yeah.
I was just saying, if you guys are thinking of questions, yeah, okay, we'll get right back to you. I just want to mention that if you have any questions, please let us know. And Paul, if there's anything in the chat, if anybody has a question. Okay.
I'm just glad you said the thing about intention and impact, because, I mean, obviously there are leaders here in this room, and I think it's important too, to also see them as victimized in ways as well. They were lied to, they were gaslit, they were manipulated. And I mean, this is uncomfortable to say, but obviously many of the leaders, you know, some of them are not here. I wish they were here, but they couldn't work closely with Mike Brown, and there's a reason. Many people, it was a lot of turnover, and I think that is also kind of a red flag hindsight. And I think that it's important to also acknowledge that they were in ways victims themselves.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, just to
No, go for it,
piggyback
yeah.
on that really quick, sorry, Sarah. To piggyback on that really quickly was, I think that I've heard some people say they don't trust anyone, even no matter what side they're on. So, you know, I don't know if I can trust Ryan, I don't know if I can trust Bob, I don't know if I can trust these guys, and I just want to maybe give you some language for that, because I think that that's real, and the reason is not necessarily because they have been advocating and doing what this community needs, I think, to heal. And we're grateful for that, right? We are very grateful for that. The problem is that that is a reaction of the institution failing us, including the leaders, right? It's an institutional betrayal, and that creates distrust. And that is a trauma response, right? We don't trust leadership now, even if they've given us no reason not to, you know, personally. There's still maybe some suspicion there, and that is because the institution failed us and betrayed us. They were supposed to protect us. We're all sort of experiencing, you know, obviously Sarah, Kim and Ray and their family are the direct, they felt the impact directly because they're the survivors in this story. We all are experiencing it secondary and secondhand, and that is a thing. That is a clinical theory that is out there, and I think that's what we're feeling. I didn't have that experience with leadership, but I can still feel it as part of the institution. And so, unfortunately, and I think it's important that, sorry, this is longer than I thought. Unfortunately, like either in explicit or implicit ways, anyone that was part of leadership might experience like people distrusting, like some mistrust in that way, just because of they represent the institution, right, on some level. And that's a process to get through, right? That's just and everybody's on a different journey with that. And so them being here and sharing what they're saying and repenting and advocating is a step in the direction of healing for the community. So, yeah.
I feel healed, that's good. I didn't think of it that way, I'm just kidding. Okay, go ahead, Sarah, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, girl.
So historically, Kat and I, our neighbors across the street, right, Brownsville, Fire, like at a certain point, her family was right across the street. I graduated with your dad, Tom, and so this is, I'm getting to a question, but historically, like I know this family pretty well, and I've seen you be a missionary. You were at Brownsville Fire for a long time, and your family really went through the ringer. One of the reasons I left Fire was because Barry's left. And it was like finally I saw the red flags that kind of like historically more pastoral people were leaving, and I was like, I don't know, I just don't feel like I fit here anymore. But that was one of the last straws. So, and I don't really talk about that because, you know, it was my decision. I'm an adult and I'm going to go do things with my life. But I wanted to ask you, with your family, we know there's historically a lot of other stuff between you and the Browns and all that good stuff. I actually wanted to see how I just want to hear the positive part of how you're viewing going to church and how you're viewing being a Christian through your family going through so much. I mean, it's so easy to get jaded. And I think that it's so important that we talk about this part. Because for me, I was jaded for a while, but I never lost my relationship with Jesus. So I would love to hear your perspective and just how, and I mean, this could be for anybody here, but I'd love to hear it from your point of view too. I mean, a lot of these families up here, the Schmitz were amazing. I knew that whole family. Homes, of course, but I really want to hear, because it just, there's been so many circumstances in your family that the Browns have led into, so, yeah.
That's a great, tough question. You know, not gonna lie, I think right before things happened with my family, we saw stuff happen with the Kabbas. And I'll never forget we were in Thailand, and John Kava was there on the trip, and Joanne's just sitting, I think we were on Susan Hoare's bed together, weeping at just pain they were going through. I don't even know all the ins and outs, but they were pushed out. And there was a letter written about their circumstance that was sent out that they had no influence over what it was, and they were just devastated. I know, I think fences have been mended, but even then, all of a sudden I'm like, I don't want to be a part of this. And I was a missionary, my parents were both working there, were living here, and I remember calling my parents and I just said, it's a matter of time before Mike and Nancy turn on you, trust me. Like, I'm just seeing patterns. Like you said, people are gone here today, gone tomorrow. If you cross Mike, that's not an option. You either kind of go along or you're done. And sadly, that's just, we can see it. There's a long pattern. So happened to my parents. There's so much there. He didn't just dismiss my parents. He very verbally, aggressively went after my sister, who was only 28. She had 3 young boys going through a horrible divorce. For her privacy's sake, I'm not going to go into why, but I mean, multiple biblical reasons why she should leave. And it was getting unsafe for her to be in this marriage. And for whatever, like a pattern, I don't know if Ron hit on it. Mike hates exposure. And so my sister choosing to stand up as a frail, weak, 3 young kids, doesn't have money, nothing to her name, at 28 years old, having the courage to say, I'm not putting up with this anymore, I'm leaving. Did it like quietly, humbly. Mike, basically called my parents, said, you need to tell Rachel she cannot divorce this man. I married them, I'm the patriarch spiritually of this family. You need to go along with this. And my parents were like, no, we're supportive. And that was basically it for my parents. And then Mike literally called my sister's friends and tried to wheel them against certain different people in her life. And it didn't make sense. But now we see this long history. Mike is afraid of exposure. We know a little more now why. And so for me, it didn't rattle my trust in Jesus, but like Annie was even saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, it kind of, we've had different times even since then, but I felt like everything that as a young adult and a teenager and my parents, like our lives, like were connected to and kind of followed, it just crumbled. The beautiful thing, and like your parents told you, Annie, Jesus is the rock. Like Jesus is what we're standing on. When we choose to trust in Jesus, Jesus is the rock we're standing on Jesus, but incredibly broken and incredibly disinterested in anything institutional, Christian leader, anything. And bless my husband, because we were dating and engaged during this season. And I'll be honest, like this is, we're going on 17 years of marriage, like the character and integrity that I saw in my husband, like won me over to like, not just Jesus, but like, I don't know, Christian culture. And then actually we moved, and it's so funny because I just wanted nothing to do with Fire Brownsville. He gets a job at Richard Crisco's church. So I'm like, great. But I will say this, and I can say this in true sincerity, the love and like the true, because I do believe with you, looking back now, I'm like, I almost feel like we were exploited for like people's visions and desires and newsletters, and we can brag about this and that. When I moved to Michigan and, with Nate and we were with Richard Crisco, his true love, concern, and pastoral like presence healed me. And I remember he looked at me, he goes, I know you're marrying Nate, because Nate was on staff of the church. He looked at me, he goes, you're his wife. I have 0 expectations of you. He goes, if you want to come in late every Sunday, sit in the back, that's okay. We're just so glad that you're here. And just who he was, like really won me over. And so, and funny enough, and Annie, like we've gone through it too in 2020 when all like Ron was saying, the Rick Joyner, the Todd Bentley, Carl Lentz, Ravi Zacharias, Nate and I are like, okay, we're out. Not Jesus, but this is so bizarre. These movements that you're aligning yourself with, when you see this happening, it's like, is anybody legit? Jesus is, but is any, and the ulterior motives, even if you're not touching and having sex with people, the money and the notoriety and the name and lights, it's like, we want nothing to do with this. So we've had our times through the years, but again, all those seasons underneath, it's like, it's the rock. Like God is our firm foundation. We're going to be disappointed again. We're going to disappoint. And it just has encouraged me, like in my faith, and I want to teach my children, just plant yourself on the rock. because these storms are gonna come.
So I want to, yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Yeah, just in addition to that, for me, I said, yeah, this is all what I went through and all is very resurfaced, very raw now. And I'm very much grappling, and I would imagine many of you, whether you're watching live stream or in here, are too, with just how do we perceive Jesus and how has that been skewed because of what we experienced back then, whether it was direct abuse or just the atmosphere, the culture not being what it should be. And that's something I'm really wrestling with, to be very honest. I've got, I found about a dozen old VHS tapes of Brownsville revival services that were student school of ministry led. And a lot of them, and for those of you who know what I did there, I played the cello on the worship team. And a lot of them are videos, old VHSs of me up there on the platform with Billy and Sarah and the worship team. And I have struggled, even the last couple of weeks, watching some of these again. But I've wanted to face it because I remember how I felt. And this is what I want, this is where my confusion lies, and maybe hopefully some of you can relate to this. Being on the worship team there, I could not deny the presence of God. I remember times playing my cello when I felt a very weighty, glorious presence of God on me. But it was, I was so confused that it was so distorted because, and I remember playing, and it's interesting, I'm like looking back in the VHS tapes, I can see it on my face 25 years ago still. Feeling this, the presence of God, but going, wait a minute, God, as I was playing, why are you so harsh? Why do you demand so much of me that so that I can be free? Because that was what I was being groomed to believe, was that the person who took me through deliverance all those months flat out told me at one point, you are riddled with unusually strong demonic strongholds. It's going to take us probably years to get you free, but don't worry, we'll walk with you through it. He actually had that conversation with me, and it was only a week later they completely cut me off, ironically. So that was my perception, was that God is harsh, that he demands a lot of me that I'll never quite measure up. And yet here we were in this revival atmosphere where God, he was there. And so now, for me, maybe many of you, I'm trying to look at it going, God, I need to understand better what, in the aftermath of 25 years, what have I carried through in my thinking about you that's warped still? Because that's what I believe there's a lot about how I perceive God that's very warped still. And I've lived on in my Christian faith despite it. But we, like Kat's saying, we need to face Jesus. We need to get to the bottom of, through engaging and really digging into the Bible more, who is he? And coming to that conclusion to heal up from the misconceptions. And one other thing I would really implore any of you who are particularly male Christian leaders to really pause and take time. It goes along the lines with what Bob Gladstone was talking about earlier. Before promoting yourself or allowing yourself to be promoted into leadership, particularly over women, that you make sure that you've checked your heart, that you've checked your life, that you have honed in on who Jesus is and are mirroring as best as a human being can his character. Because especially if you're going to go so far as what used to happen back in those days of calling yourself a spiritual father, or in the case of women, a spiritual mother, that comes with a huge responsibility because you are portraying, whether it's skewed or not, you're portraying Jesus to those under you. And it messes with them when your life doesn't match up with the character of Jesus, when they see in the case of men, maybe your masculinity coupled with a heavy anointing or a prophetic mantle, and it's abusive and it's violent and it's rough and that person under you, particularly women, us with our sensitivities, we take on an image of God that it's what you're displaying to us, whether it's accurate or not. And it's a great caution. I think we need to look hard at it in the church.
That's what I was going to ask you. What would you say? And how would you describe? How would you try to help people who are either going through that situation or leaders who are, advocating this type of ministry. But I think you answered it pretty well right there. So I want to make sure that are there any questions at this point? I want to make sure I don't miss something. Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
In our church, we're just starting, but just recognizing through some of this situation, the need for a protocol to be in place where if an abusive situation does happen, how can especially ladies have a good place and a safe place to report that and take care of it? Especially with some of what you've experienced and the pushback and the intimidation. Just as we develop this protocol, what are some of the good things we need to have in mind to make it easy for people to report things like that?
A seat at the table. A seat at the table. I think that's one of the things that I've talked to many different people in the last several months that I knew from fire, and mostly, all of them women, and I heard a consistent and felt it myself that we felt like our voices were cut. We didn't have one. Like, you can have you can preach a complementarian theology, right, where women have a place and, can do things like ministry, but you can still be very egalitarian in your practice and in your mindset. And I think that's what we experience. Women don't have a seat at this table many times. And did I flip those?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I flipped them. Yes, sorry, I flipped those. Flip that. So I think, I don't know. I personally, and maybe this goes into some part of Sarah's question, I think I don't feel safe. I cannot go into a church and sit in a service and not battle anxiety, because something in my body is like, this is not a safe place for you. This is not a safe place for you. So talk about the mental gymnastics that I'm having to go through just to try and be part of a community and hold on to my faith at the same time, but nothing feeling safe about any of it. And so I think to feel safe, we need to know that we're valued. Don't just give us the lip service that, yeah, oh, sure. We have to have a voice that matters.
Can I too, I'm sorry, look, I flew in, I got in at 1:30 last night, so I'm just gonna say what I have on my heart. Sorry, I keep taking the mic. Brett, it's so good too, because we've often thought about this, and we came, I think our age group, we grew up in such a hyper-focused purity culture. And the amount of responsibility of like a woman walks in a room in some of those circumstances and just automatically feels like I did something wrong, just because I'm a female. And that's very immature. You look at how Jesus lived his life and the comfort he had around women, worldly, sinful women. And so I think that we need to take out, I believe in walking in integrity, morality. The fear has to go. I think so many men are so afraid of lust, and so many women are, we were brought up, you got to dress a certain way or you're going to make that man stumble. I say BS on that. I do think that we need to obviously have wisdom. Let's talk to men like, hey, you're godly. You have the Spirit of God within you. Let's keep going with discipline, and let's treat women like sisters. They're not the object of temptation. And that is the way we were treated. We are the object of temptation. The shame that us women had to shed in that. So I would say start with that mindset. Talk to the men in your church like, we need to be brothers and we need to grow up. Like, we cannot treat women as this like, oh, like we feel it. And it brings shame, it brings condemnation. And then when we do speak out, we're not believed half the time. And so I love that question, Brett. But I can just say yes, like the whole imbalance of the purity culture has got to be totally appalled and like rebuilt. Does anyone else understand what I'm saying with that?
I think we had.
Yeah, it's not a question. It was more, we're talking about it in a very spiritual way, but I come from a legal background. And unfortunately, I've had to deal with sexual assault cases in my practice. And it's really sad when it happens at a church. And it happened years ago. Years ago from another church that I had, 3 of the young girls that were my little girls, now teenagers, came back to tell me that the pastor that was there and all this. So I think that not only do we need to establish spiritually, but I think if people in your congregation know that there's a process and a protocol that's taking place that sets it all in where it's supposed to be, that women can go to an elder that has the training, that has the capability to hear what's being said, that then can bring it to those that are in leadership and not sweep it under the rug. And this way, there's that sense of safety. So I've seen a lot of churches that I've been part of that don't have any of that established. And then it happens and it's like, okay, now what do we do now? And like you said, let's not say nothing until we can figure it out. And then that brings the shame, whether it's a girl or a guy. I've had cases where it's the boys that were molested. So it's really the reality. And just so I can add one real quick thing. I couldn't understand why a couple of weeks ago I had a dream and I couldn't figure why it was. And I think it had to do with what's going on here today. The Lord showed me that we have become such a society that we focus on the one that's delivering the message rather than what message is being delivered.
Yes.
And he said, Terry, they got to come back to the main thing, me. He goes, remember when pigeons, and that was the vision that I got, pigeons would come with a message and drop off the message. That's how you used to get your mail, right? Before, whatever, that's the story. But when the pigeon dropped it off, you didn't honor the pigeon. You didn't worship the pigeon. You just took the note and you read the message. It's going back to what was said earlier this morning, and I think it was the young man that left. Let's go back to the Word of God. We were gifted with the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is going to give us the discernment that we need, so then this way we can do what you said. When you're feeling it inside of you, and the Lord gives you that moment that something's not right, you can take that stand and not allow our wings to be clipped as women, because you're right. Whenever a woman speaks up, then we got the spirit of Jezebel. No, we have the spirit of discernment and we're speaking out loud.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with just churches are woefully behind when we're talking about understanding trauma responses and things like that. I mean, how we listen to Mercy Culture give a master class in no trauma informed anything, right? Like they just, well, you know, they give every reason that they gave that you know, why Sarah, it wasn't what Sarah is saying, is because they had no understanding of trauma responses. And so I think even just getting education, you know, I so appreciate, you know, Rob quotes a lot of Diane Lightberg and Dr. Pooler and these folks. There are a lot of really good resources out there that help us practically understand what's going on in our brains and think, you know, I mean, there's a practical aspect instead of, you know, spiritualizing it doesn't legitimize an argument. And I think that's what we've seen a lot of, is just a lot of spiritualizing certain things to make it sound good, but it's not actually legitimate. And the church, a lot of the, well, I don't know, it seems like a lot of the church is so far behind in just basic understanding. So I think just even educating yourself on being trauma responsive in a positive way to be safe.
No, I just, to piggyback on that, I totally agree. Education. Diane Lamberg is an incredible author. If you haven't read her book, When the Church Harms God's People, I think is the first one I've read, and it's incredibly enlightening and gives so much language to so much of this. But also locally, and I think you're local, right, Brett? There is an incredible local therapist here. Her name's Natalie Atwell. And I'm just going to shout her name out because she's really amazing. And so I think just like resources, and then also like having those people's contact for if someone does come forward with something like that, like a safe place that they can go talk to a, you know, psychologist, therapist, someone that has actual training in language for what's happening.
That's powerful. I don't want to stop the conversation, but we do want to get the next panel going. Do we have one more from
We
the?
have one question.
Absolutely, go for it. Let's do it.
Okay, so the question online is, how have you been able to process the purity culture in the fact that Mike Brown did not live the purity culture he preached?
Is there a question for anyone specific or?
Nobody in particular. So
Okay,
any of
got
you ladies feel, you know, the unction?
I think we're all still trying to detox some of the purity culture. And again, we're not against purity. It's not that I think some of the things, I can't imagine there's many people in this room, especially that were there a while ago. I know things have morphed through the years, but to know like students would be on summer break and come back, and there were some leaders that would call them in and be like, how far did you go with your significant, your boyfriend or girlfriend this summer? And literally, if like a hand went a certain way or this and that, they were kicked out of school and asked in like grotesque detail, like this was the culture. And so to know like that shame and that fear, and again, like, yeah, people were just being people in a lot of cases, and they were kicked out, this and that. And then when people who were either kicked out or lived under this fear and this oppression find out that he's got his hands on people and talking sexually to this other woman, that was, I think a lot of people struggled deeply with that. So I think a lot of people are struggling with it, but there's something about lights getting turned on that bring healing. So they're struggling, but they're healing. I think talking about it is just helping a lot of people.
Yeah, I think the conversations are super helpful. Go ahead.
Yeah, just really quick. I think the part that I process so much is like looking back, and it felt like so many of the rules in place, like why was everything sexualized? It didn't have to be. And so if you're hyper focused and you're hyper aware and purity and all of this, then of course that's what everyone's obsessing then or thinking about and obsessing over. And so I think it's learning to balance, like, it's okay if I hold my husband's hand in public or at church, like that's okay. And I'm not causing the person behind me to start lusting and having dirty thoughts and whatever, it's just like everything. So it's a process, right? All of us are on a different, it's just a process, and it's praying. I think it's just praying through it. There's no easy answers, and therapy, I will always advocate for therapy. Like there's no easy answer or no one method, right? Everyone has their own process and their own journey. And so a lot of us probably, if we're not, could benefit from some professional like therapy to help us sort of untangle some of these things along with our faith, because Jesus can heal in a therapist's office. I mean, therapy saved my life. I will always advocate for it.
We'll go ahead and wrap up here pretty soon, but go ahead, Sarah. Yeah.
I think certainly I'll say myself, as this is where I'm at, we need to redefine and get a proper definition of what grace really is, because we were in an environment where there were all these rules around sexuality, as Christina just said, and I had my own weird moment also with the lady who had called herself my spiritual mother. A situation when it was summer break. School wasn't even in session at school there, and I got invited into a female friend's apartment. Little did I know there was a male in there. They weren't doing anything. I don't know who he was. He was just there in the apartment. And because of the way we were taught to be on such high alert about our own personal sin, I felt guilty. I thought I've done something wrong. And I went to my spiritual mother and felt the need to confess. I accidentally found myself in this apartment. There was a guy there. And she said, well, I'll consider it you coming and confessing your confession to me personally being, I'll forgive you on behalf of the school and we'll let it go. And that's what she told me. And I thought, okay, good, I'm off the hook. I confessed, and she represented the school for me in that moment. But just looking back on how twisted all that was, even now, as a 47-year-old that I am today, I realize I don't have a proper understanding, really, I don't think, of God's grace and what the balance needs to be. Because I've always been on high alert, thinking everything I do wrong or every little thing, I've got to make sure it's not a demon, for one thing, because of my negative experience back then. Make sure there's not some demonic influence I need to rid myself of and ask for God's freedom from, but also I've given myself very little grace, which it helps me realize I really don't understand grace the way I need to. And that's where I'm at. Maybe you can relate.
Amber, go ahead with the final
Last
word.
thing,
Yeah.
it will be really quick, but I want to say, I think
back to that question that was asked to us, I think that in these settings, power can sometimes make men fear the human inside themselves. And I think we can all agree that everyone in here is a human. We've all had a sinful thought. We've all committed sin, like truly. And I think everything that we've heard today from Ron and Bob, and I know we're going to hear from another panel, there have been so many attempts to meet Dr. Brown in his humanity with love, with grace, with belief, with truth. And where it's broken is the failure to be truthful. So,
Speaking the truth to one another. Okay, guys, thank you, ladies, for being on the panel. I think we do. Stay for a second. We will take a short, so we do have the room until 5, but we have to clean up prior to that. So we'll go a little bit past the scheduled time of 4. We'll run to about 4:15 with the next panel. Let's take a quick 5-minute break, come right back in here, and we'll go from there, okay? Thank you guys again, appreciate it. Thank you.